Hi, and welcome to Trek Talk. We're here on our new replica of the Battle Bridge. I'm Matthew Curtis Kahn.
I'm Troy Harper.
And as you can see, we're traveling along at a pretty good pace here. We want to give a real quick thank you to the stagehand students who are in the theater department who help us cut all the pieces to put all of this together. We wish to thank Jeff Weiser and all of the students under his command. We also wish to thank Ken, what's Ken's?
Wilson.
Ken Wilson. Momentary lapse?
That's okay.
But we wish to thank Kim Wilson for the use of tools and a little bit of help in designing and getting everything together. We still have a little ways to go. We have some ambience lights that we're going to put in and some red alert stuff and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it'll be fun once we're done with it.
Oh yes, very much fun.
It'll be a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. But for right now, the warping screen will have to do for you. But today we've got a really good show for you. We're going to do kind of a comparison between the movies. And now Troy and I, we differ a little bit on our opinions of films, the Star Trek films, as much as we are big fans of Star Trek. Troy's got one movie that he particularly cares for. I've got mine. But first off, we want to just kind of give a general rundown of the Star Trek films. Of course, everything started off with Star Trek: The Motion Picture in
1979.
1979 was the year that was released. They had all of the new sets built and all the new spaceship designs ready for Star Trek II.
Yeah, that's an interesting. The Star Trek II series, which we may have talked about this before. The Star Trek II series was a development back when Paramount in the 70s wanted to make their own TV network, which they eventually ended up doing in the 90s. But when in the 70s they wanted to do this as well, and Star Trek II, which is what they were calling the show, was going to be their launching point, was going to be their big premiere show. And at the last minute, budget constraints and everything else, they canceled the show, even as after the sets were built. So and the scripts were done and the sets were built, and about a week before shooting, they said, the show was gone, no show. So they actually ended up using those sets for the movies.
They sure did. And in fact, the story itself was, I believe, one of the stories that they had originally planned as an episode for one of the Star Trek II shows. If I'm not mistaken, it was written by Alan Dean Foster, who is a very good science fiction writer. He did the story version of Aliens, or excuse me, Alien, the original, the first one by Dan O'Bannon. And they had some masterful special effects on there. The computers actually now had functioning keys and screens that were quite an improvement over the original series, and it really dazzled a lot of the people that grew up on Trek. They really ate it up because it was a whole new look to the same old thing, and I think that's probably why Star Trek: The Motion Picture was the biggest success in the box office.
Right, it took Star Trek out of the budget constraints that it had in the 60s and put it more into a George Lucas kind of arena.
Definitely.
That was going on at the time, with special effects being a prime part of of movie making, especially with science fiction. And then Star Trek jumped on board, and it was Star Trek was the perfect vehicle for that sort of thing. It's like visual effects were made for Star Trek.
And they really kind of were. In fact, George Lucas was inspired by Star Wars itself, or Star Trek itself.
Yeah,
excuse me. His Star Wars saga was inspired by Star Trek. He grew up watching that kind of stuff. So, and actually, it's kind of interesting that later on, George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic, the best special effects people on the planet,
the best,
the very best.
Don't even.
Yeah.
Don't even argue about anyone else. I don't care about those guys who did the Matrix. ILM.
ILM is the best. They came along and actually did the Star Trek stuff later on for the Next Generation in several movies. They were on board to do the special effects for that. But Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out of all of the movies that they've made for Star Trek. Star Trek: The Motion Picture grossed $109 million in the box office. The biggest Star Trek movie to ever.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, it's the biggest release that they had ever had.
Well, I know it was publicized for a long time, the return of the original Star Trek crew to the big screen, and the idea of just the crew returning, because by this time, Star Trek has this huge cult following.
Right.
And just the idea of the crew returning to doing something together, in a Star Trek context, was beautiful to some people, and people wanted to see it. And the publicity from this skyrocketed the movie, I'm sure. But I wasn't aware that it's the highest grossing Star Trek movie.
It is. It is. The motion picture was the highest grossing out of all the Star Trek movies that have been made.
Wow.
109 million. Now there have been a few other ones that have come close. Star Trek First Contact came pretty close to that. Star Trek II was right on its heels.
I think 4 did a lot.
Four did exceptionally well. Exceptionally well. But Star Trek the motion picture really just kind of led into sequels. I mean, you couldn't just have one Star Trek movie. It was an impossibility. And still to this day, the thought of there not being a Star Trek movie at least every 4 years.
Yeah, is a bit unnerving to some people.
It really is, especially to science fiction fans. I mean,
oh, yeah.
I mean, just about every science fiction fan that you have is usually a fan of Star Trek, and they do like to see the Star Trek movies come out.
Well, in addition to that, I think Paramount's found themselves a little piggy bank there.
Yeah.
With the Star Trek series.
Definitely so.
Even if there's one on television, the ones at the screenings at the theaters are going to make them a lot more money, so they're going to do it.
Definitely, definitely. And that just kind of, the storylines also just kind of keep on going. I think that was one of the interesting things that we start seeing with Star Trek II. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, was a very well-written movie. And it I believe
that was the film that Roddenberry brought in Harv Bennett, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. That was Harv Bennett's first major Star Trek film to work on. And of course, he later, after Roddenberry passed on, just kind of picked up the thing as Star Trek and went on with it as far as the movies were concerned, even some of the series.
Right, right.
Harv Bennett's really kind of carried it through. But this was his first big film to work on. They had a great great story put together in which originally Leonard Nimoy was supposed to die and then never come back. Leonard Nimoy, of course, at this time was wanting to kind of separate himself from Star Trek and start working on other projects. The movie also brought back one of the classic enemies from the classic series Star Trek back during the 60s. Khan was a genetically engineered superhuman, and he had his little band of followers who were also genetically engineered from the 1990s. Supposedly, mind you, people, that Khan and all of these people were born basically in the mid to early 1990s, right before the onset of the Third World War.
Yeah, they were in power actually in the 1990s. So
they were.
I don't know when they were born, but they were supposed to have. He was supposed to have been some type of dictator in the 90s, I believe.
He
Maybe,
was.
Milosevic type of guy. I don't know.
Well,
I mean, except genetically engineered to better serve the people, I guess. I don't know.
Exactly. Superior intellect, superior strength. He was, the cream of the crop, supposedly. But along with that, of course, had this humongous. He had to conquer his fellow humans because they were inferior, and of course, having all the intelligence and the power and the knowledge and everything that he had, well, of course, had to take him over. And we see that in the classic series, Khan really isn't that bad of a guy. He just wants to get back to what he knows, and of course he wants to take over the ship from Kirk. He wants to take over the Enterprise from Kirk in the original series, and ends up getting marooned on was it
City Alpha 5 or
City Alpha 5. Now, many years later, of course, Kirk is now in admiral position. Spock is training his cadets for the the Enterprise. He's training new cadets to put on the Enterprise. Chekhov has gone off and is now a lieutenant first mate, lieutenant commander under Captain Terrell in the USS Reliant, which is a science vessel, a study vessel, scout ship. And of course, they bump into Khan. Now, one of the funny things about that, of course, is in the classic series, Chekhov was not an actual member of the cast until the middle of that season. And that episode, Space Seed, that had Khan in it, was one of the first I think it was one of the first 10 episodes.
Oh, it may have been, I believe.
And we don't see Chekhov until well later.
Yeah, yeah.
In the series, and of course, as soon as Khan
when he
pops
shows up
off,
as, when Chekhov shows up as Davy Jones from the Monkees, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And as soon as Khan pops off his dust mask and everything else, Chekhov immediately recognizes
Khan.
and Khan automatically knows him. So it's pretty much assumed that Chekhov was there the whole time. He just hadn't been
I think
promoted.
so. He just hadn't been promoted. He wasn't working on the bridge.
But
But that's one thing I like. I mean, that was a flaw. But Harv Bennett really worked into putting the story together from, well, he put it together from the idea. He went back and researched the original series. And, in the motion picture, which was very good, the idea never came in, we know all this stuff. We're not going to go back and do this again. Harv Bennett wanted a character that had been there before. He wanted a background.
an arch nemesis.
An arch nemesis of sorts. And what he wanted was a background. And he wanted this background to be well known to the fans, but he also wrote the story as if you had no idea who these people were.
Right.
You've just come in. Even at the beginning of the film, it introduces the film in the 23rd century, as if this is all brand new. Mm-hmm. We've never seen this before. And it's a brilliant concept, and he goes through and introduces each character as if you've never known who they were.
Which was great.
It was great. It was great.
It was incredible because it brought in a lot of people. Because the movie, you didn't have to go into a lot of character development because the people that had already been with the series already knew
who they were.
And then the people that had never actually really gotten into Star Trek, they could watch it and kind of, they really could understand where everybody was supposed to be and what was going on without having to sit through a lot of tedious, long hours of catching up on old Trek episodes.
Right, exactly.
Excellent. It was an excellent film. Of course, then the problem arose with Leonard Nimoy. He wanted to come back to Trek. They had killed off Spock, and he wasn't going to come back. And then he realized that he really did like Star Trek, and he really did like being Spock, and that Star Trek really wasn't Star Trek without Spock.
Without Spock, no, it wasn't.
The classic Star Trek couldn't be Star Trek without Spock. So then, of course, they wrote Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. And of course, we see in the final scenes of Star Trek 2 where Spock dies from saving the ship and they shoot him off to the Genesis planet. Well, in Star Trek 3,
they have to go.
They have to go back and
they write a story to where they have to find Spock. And what's interesting about that is that Nimoy really, the way it was written, Nimoy didn't have a part in the film until the very end, where his character is resurrected, and we see that Spock's alive. For those of you who haven't seen it, Spock does live. But we find that Spock's been resurrected, and there's no real part for Nimoy in the film, for the film to be accurate. You couldn't just start the film up and hey, there's Spock, and how you doing, Spock? Good to see you. He's like Kenny from South Park.
Yeah.
He just shows, he's back, he's alive again at the end. So Nimoy wanted to play a major role in it, so he begged, essentially. I don't know if he'd had to do too much begging, but he got the chance to direct the film.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, that was one of the greatest things, one of the best things that Roddenberry and the producers ever let Nimoy do was direct.
Mm-hmm.
And with that film, it opened up a lot of opportunity for Nimoy to direct. I think he directed 2 more films.
Actually, he directed more than that. I think
he directed Star Trek 4 and Star Trek 6.
4 and 6, and you're right, 4 and 6.
4 and 6.
Didn't do 5.
He didn't do 5. No.
Mm-hmm. That was Shatner's.
But yeah, that's when it opened up the door for several other cast members to direct when they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there had been some cast member writing before. I'm not sure. There may have been. Mm-hmm. But now cast members are writing, they're directing, they're becoming more involved in the show. And because I think you and I have talked about this before, when you get on Star Trek, it becomes kind of a brand on you.
Yeah, it does.
And
you get marked by it.
You get marked by it, and no matter how far outside you go, you're still going to be associated with Star Trek.
Right.
Because of the cult following.
Right.
And so it opened up, it gave people an opportunity, like Nimoy, who weren't originally happy with being stuck with Star Trek, an opportunity to work more within the confines of the show, and take more jobs, do more opportunities to do what they wanted to do with their careers.
Definitely. and it was really great for Leonard Nimoy, because I think that was probably one of the reasons why he wanted to kind of get away from Trek, because he wanted to do other things as film related, and this gave him the chance to do something else besides just act. And I think that's probably why Nimoy, stayed with it until the end, because it actually gave him a chance to do something else besides act. It gave him a more potent role in the Star Trek world. And his direction. I mean, you could watch Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 4, and Star Trek 6, which are three of the better, I guess you could say, directing wise, three of the better directed Star Trek movies. They're very excellent. All the shots are put just in place, just the right moment. All the framing is very, very well done. They're excellent movies, and you can see a lot of that. I think he really came to peak in Star Trek 4. Star Trek 4, like I said, the interesting thing between Star Trek 2, 3, and 4 is that the story is really one huge story. Mm-hmm. It's unlike any other sequel that I've really ever seen. Other sequels, it's just like a tack. It's like an add-on to a story.
Right.
It's not like the same story. But Star Trek 2, 3, and 4 were the same story.
Right. They were all parts of one huge story.
Exactly.
And it worked out kind of as a trilogy. I heard someone once say that every great science fiction has its trilogy.
Right.
But and I think that's where Star Trek's trilogy came in, was in 2, 3, and 4, because after 3, during 3, Kirk and his crew have to break several Federation laws.
Yeah, the darkest moment of a trilogy is always in the middle.
Is always in the middle, and they had to break several laws, and they had to destroy the original Enterprise, which I can recall. I was alive at the time. Yes, I'm that old. I was alive, and I can remember from that time that the strictest of the Trek fans weren't going to see the movie because they knew that the Enterprise was going to be destroyed. How could they do this? Well, they killed Spock, and now they're destroying the Enterprise. What's wrong with these people?
Yeah, what are they doing?
They've lost their minds. Someone get them out of there. And the film really turned out as a catalyst for Star Trek 4, where now they're paying their dues.
Right.
The crew of the Enterprise, they end up with a Klingon bird of prey through all kinds of mayhem. From Star Trek 3, with a Klingon villain played wonderfully by
Christopher Lloyd.
Christopher Lloyd, yeah.
Yes.
Played wonderfully as the Klingon villain. But in Star Trek 4 now, it's sort of a denouement. They have to pay their dues now, and they're coming back to pay their dues, and suddenly they're caught in this. They're caught in this situation where this alien probe's been sent out looking for humpback whales. So the crew decides to heroically go back and retrieve humpback whales from the 20th century. And of course, the classic Trek scenario, the crew from the 23rd or 24th century, as it later turned out to be, goes back to the 20th century and interacts with humans of modern times.
Yeah, and that was I think one of the more popular Trek episodes, because I think a lot of people had a little bit of trouble, kind of understanding the whole Star Trek society and everything, and it was kind of funny to watch people from a totally foreign society interact on our modern day culture. We see Spock having this huge language barrier problem, cannot understand, profanity at all, but he keeps using it because, of course, Kirk tells him that people will not take you seriously unless you swear every other word.
Right.
So, of course, even when they're on the ship, away from the rest of the society, Spock is still using
a swear word.
Still using profanity. He hadn't quite caught on yet.
Well, this is the film that really that kind of moved people. I think it was the Humpback Whale, the Save the Whales theme that may have done that. It was. I found out years later that it was a serious candidate. The Academy of Motion Picture Sciences actually almost threw it in as a contender for Best Picture. But at the last minute they changed. I guess it was the science fiction genre or the Star Trek thing that bumped it out. But they were looking at it very closely for that nomination, and the picture it did gain a lot of money, and it put a lot of attention on Star Trek, which at the time it needed, because a year later the Next Generation started in.
Right.
And of course, at the end of the movie, we see that the crews are reunited with Spock, and Kirk gets to be a captain again. And at the last minute, we find out that he gets to be the captain of the Enterprise. They've rebuilt the Enterprise, and here they all come. They're in the episode. They fly off, in the typical, warp off into the sunset thing that they always tend to do. And then we move on to Star Trek V.
Oh boy.
We both have a lot of things to say about Star Trek V that we really can't say on television. But for some parts, it had its good moments, and
it did.
It was really written and shot in a sense, kind of like a classic series episode.
And it really was. It had the comedy that you found. I mean, I think that was one of the things that was kind of lacking from all the previous movies. They kind of shied away from that quirky, kind of almost cheesy comedy. They would have the little character interaction quirks. Of course, like Spock and Dr. McCoy were always going at it.
Oh, right.
Always
right.
back and forth. And so that was just hilarious to see them, to see them back at that. To see Spock and McCoy going back at it,
It's great.
Back and forth.
It's great. It brings back a lot of good memories, which is
yeah.
what they needed for the movies.
And then, of course, Jim Kirk, right there in the middle, trying to make, these two opposite ends,
Work
stick together.
Right.
Just trying to help them out and, make them understand each other and everything. It was a great show as far as the comedy. And then, of course, you get back to Scotty, who's, the ship is falling apart. For a brand new ship, they really didn't put it together too well. And Scotty's running around, pulling his hair out. He's got his hydro spanners and, little laser scalpels and everything, running around trying to fix the doors because they won't open and the computers can't talk straight.
Which is great. That's classic Trek material right there, and that's what it's good for. But the movie itself has its flaws, and it's William Shatner's directing debut, I believe.
Yes, it was.
Altogether. And keep trying, Will. I mean, Bill,
yeah.
we love you, and
We really do.
It wasn't a bad job. It wasn't a horrible job.
No. The directing, actually, the directing was done very well. I think the major point where we have a little bit of problem with it is just that the story was just too terribly long.
I think it was thrown together. It was. I think they just got in kind of a monotonous, in kind of a rut, and said, "Oh, we have to do another Trek film. Let's do another one."
Yeah. Well, I think that and the fact they had 4 or 5 different writers. Trying to write this script and the story for this movie. And this was also one of Shatner's first writing attempts, to my knowledge. As far as the films go, anyway, this was his first writing attempt for a script and storyline for this film. So it was just something. It was kind of an experiment. And it didn't fail. It just wasn't. It wasn't the best of things. There were several spots they really could have polished up on, definitely.
Yeah.
But they really came back with Star Trek VI, I think.
Yeah, Star Trek VI started out, everyone knew the original crew of the Enterprise is retiring. This was the last one, and it got pushed in. It was like Abbey Road for the Beatles. Everyone knew it was the last, and they had to finish it up. They just finished it up in a grand way. And as the movie was brilliantly done, and you really can't say enough good things about it. It's a fantastic film.
This is a very good film. It was a very good film. They got back in there. They got the action. They got a little bit of the comedy. They got everything in there that they needed to really make it work and really give the classic crew the send-off it deserved for 30, 35 years of excellent television and film. I mean,
and it worked. I also liked it too. It also worked on a classic series type of thing. The big mystery.
Yes.
The big mystery.
Kirk
and Spock Kirk and McCoy are in trouble, and we need to find out who did it. And
right.
Brilliantly done. Wonderful story. Great. It was shot wonderfully. It was put together brilliantly. Worked as a mystery. It combined, too, the elements between the classic series and the Next Generation, which was very popular at the time. And it combined the two, and it was just beautifully done. I enjoyed every second of that film.
So did I.
Very good.
I did as well.
And then we moved on, after the classic crew retired, we moved on to Generations, which is the passing of the torch. Kirk passing the torch to Picard.
Yeah. Well, and that the Generation films, we're going to have to do for an entirely different thing. We've really kind of gone up to our limit here as far as
I think so, yeah.
as far as time. But we want to thank you for joining us today. As always, we have our ship's log. If you have any comments, if your favorite movie, if you think that we didn't give justice to your favorite Trek film, write in, let us know. Tell us what you think. We'll more than likely read it on the show because we like our viewers' opinions on these things. You can write to us on snail mail at Ship's Log, Lamar University, Box 10050, and that's Beaumont, Texas 77710. Or you can email us at trektalklu@hotmail.com. We want to thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you like our new set, and we'll try to get it finished as soon as we possibly can. Thank you for watching us, and next show that we come on, I guess we'll finish up the movies.
Yeah, we'll talk more in detail.
We'll talk more in detail about
we'll have
some
a
of these.
debate over them.
Oh, yes, definitely, about our two favorite films. Thank you for joining us.
Goodbye.